Welcome to Swift Coaches Academy, a podcast dedicated to bringing exercise and health professionals the uncensored truth behind what it really takes to succeed in the health industry with me, your host, Zenia Wood. As an accredited exercise physiologist and the founder of Swift Coaches Academy with almost a decade of experience, I'm on a mission to transform the lives of ambitious health professionals who want more and are ready to take action to create incredible impact and financial freedom. So join me as I speak candidly with industry leaders about the struggles and successes from within the trenches through thought-provoking conversations.
In this episode, we have Zenia's conversation with fellow accredited exercise physiologist and head of exercise rehab at Swift Movement Academy, David Adamo. Brace yourselves for an engaging discussion as Zenia and David explore the topics of movement screening and its impact on maximizing results for clients. If you're a personal trainer or exercise coach, you won't want to miss this episode as they share insightful knowledge and useful strategies you can implement straight away.
Alrighty, back again, Zen. Another week. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I am pretty good. Ready for another episode. These come around too quickly. Today, as per your suggestion, we are going to go through an assessment and screening and scope of practice for personal trainers and you know, our role as health professionals as well, and how we can more effectively get better results and actually like figure out what you can and can't do and assessing for red flags. So I'm really excited for this one. You mentioned before we were on air that you think this is going to be a golden nugget one, so let's hope it lives up.
Yeah. Yeah, big time. I hope it does too, because you know I feel like this is one that I would have loved to have heard 5 years ago. So yeah, this is gonna have some gold nuggets in it, which is good.
I love it. Alrighty, so talk to me. Importance of movement screening. Why?
Yeah. So movement screening. Seeing how people move, essentially, seeing how the person in front of you is moving. Whether that's in their daily movement, whether that's in the gym, which, you know, sometimes has a correlation to how they're moving outside. But again, like if it's a new client who's maybe a little bit nervous, hasn't been in the gym before, it might not be exactly how they move normally as well. There's other factors at play, but just to keep it simple, you know, seeing how they squat, bodyweight squat, seeing how they lunge, seeing how they hip hinge, if they can hip hinge, is it coming from their hips? Is it coming from their low back? Where's it coming from? All these things, like you can just accumulate so much information that you can then write a specific program that's going to blow the client in front of you out of the park, especially if they haven't had anything like that before.
And so, like, I mean, most PTs are probably looking at squats and lunges and they're looking at how you move. But like, let's say somebody is flexing their spine during a hip hinge. What are you then thinking with programming immediately?
Yeah. So first of all, flexing the spine through hip hinge, then you automatically think, okay, do they have too much or do they have not enough range in their hamstrings and glutes? Do they not know how to effectively move from their hips? You know, which will have a correlation to everyday life, that they, you know, might be continually doing that movement all the time, when we can find more optimal ways to help them out. And also just
sorry, you go.
No. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, like, just, you know, provide examples and opportunities. You know, it's not necessarily just optimizing and everything has to be done with a straight spine. But if that's the only movement that they're producing or that's their default movement, it's like, okay, well, then they're going to do it. Let me pick up the washing. They're going to do that. And it's like, you know, hey, like, have you experienced back pain, or like, you know, what's going on? Or, you know, usually it leaves clues, right? Because if people can't hinge effectively, we're looking at things like eccentric hamstring load. So we want to be able to, you know, we're not going to go and strengthen their hamstrings in a leg curl in our program. We're going to go and get them to, you know, if they can't, if we're working through loading to nail the hip hinge in terms of RDLs or anything like that, why don't we also get them doing Nordics at the same time, or something where they're eccentrically loading through their hip, not necessarily even the knee portion of the hamstring. And so it does absolutely leave a lot of clues. And so let's say we've got that information. Let's say we've done our movement. We've just seen, I don't know, their elbow wings out whenever they do a push up, and they're really sort of like flaring, shrugging through their shoulders and things like that. These are the common things that are pretty basic. But when we talk about, I guess, movement screening, or assessment, really, not just looking at the movements, but the assessments, what things do you think that PTs don't do that they actually is within their scope of practice that they could be doing in terms of assessing their clients?
Yeah. So when you see certain things like that through the global movements, it kind of gives you clues to look a little bit deeper in. And that's something that, sometimes, I'm not saying all PTs do it, but sometimes it stops at surface level at the global movement when that allows you to zoom in.
And sometimes it's like, it's not the fault of the PTs, right? It's like they don't know what else are the options to them. And
exactly,
it's like
right.
They go, oh, well, I have to do the hip hinge and then I'll just get better at that. But if we were to dig a little bit deeper, what sort of things, would we want to look at?
Yeah, so we want to, I'd love to get looking at joint by joint approaches, and see how they move, what their movement is like at each specific joint, because then you can say, okay, well, they're doing that movement because they're maybe a little bit restricted here, and it's just not allowing them to produce the movement that we want to attain, or whatever it may be. So like what we always have a look at the major areas. So we look at the spine in the different segments, look up the top at the cervical spine, then the thoracic, the lumbar. We look at the shoulders, we look at the hips, we look at the knees and the ankles as well, and just see if there's any deficits around those areas. And by deficits, that's obviously an arbitrary term as well. And it's like everybody's going to have slightly different range. Obviously, we've got the norms there, and I don't know if everybody is aware of them. We definitely teach them and go through them, but just knowing what the normal range of motion is for those specific joints, and if they're not reaching it, why?
So I guess, for example, like maybe we take that hip hinge that we spoke about before. Let's say we don't know if it's that they are restricted, or maybe it's just a movement patterning issue, or we don't know if it's the hamstring length really isn't there. So we could look at doing like a straight leg raise where you lay them on their back on the ground and you lock the knee out into extension, you keep the ankle at sort of 90 degrees, and you get them to raise their leg up as high as they can. And it's like, well, if they can only raise their leg to like 40-50 degrees up off the ground, it's like, well, let's attack the hamstrings, as opposed to trying to teach a hip hinge, when you can try and teach someone a hip hinge, but they've only got 50 degrees of like length in their hamstrings in a straight leg raise. Then it's like, we need to address that before, and address the mobility before we just add load to something and then go, why isn't it working?
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing, right? The body tries to find the most efficient way to do something, right? Now, if you have, like you said, 40 degrees of straight leg raise and your hamstrings just aren't allowing you to get into that hip hinge effectively, then of course we're going to flex at the spine. They're probably going to have a little bit more range there. It's probably going to feel more comfortable, and at the end of the day, it's going to be more efficient on the body, which is that's not helping us when we want to teach the hip hinge, right? And it's like, why go and
you go.
I was just going to say, why go and just trying to nail the hip hinge in? Like, there's nothing wrong with it. You can concurrently do it together, work on the hamstrings, isolated, and work on the hip hinge together, in two separate, exercises, whatever it may be that you choose, and get a quicker result.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And the joint by joint approach, when we talk about that, we do go through, you want to be able to get a certain amount of thoracic rotation. And so we assess that individually. We assess things like shoulder flexion, shoulder extension. I believe we have a ton of these videos on YouTube as well already. So you can look and find these on our YouTube channel individually, where I take you through how to do these things. But having a look at, if someone can't get full overhead shoulder flexion without any sort of compensation through thoracic extension or hip extension or whatever it is, it's like, well, then why the fuck would you overhead shoulder press them? Because they can't get there, and then you're adding load to a position that they don't have access to. So by doing these global assessments where you maybe, get your clients to chuck their arms over their head and you're like, okay, that looks a little bit off. Like maybe I would test in isolation, shoulder flexion, so that I can have a look through that. And just to be clear, first, there's nothing wrong with a personal trainer assessing someone's range of motion. That is totally within scope. I just think it's something that not a lot of PTs know how to do. You're not providing diagnoses. You're not, doing manual therapy. You're just being like, your range of motion is this. And then, normal range of motion is this. So we want to try and improve that. And then that just gives you more evidence and research on those clients to be able to create better programs for them, so that you're not putting someone into a compromised position firstly, but so you're getting them better results. So
gives you the opportunity to explain to the client in front of you what you're doing and why. Give them a bit more clarity in terms of, hey, your squat just doesn't feel right, but we took a step back and we analyzed a few different things, and we know that you're maybe a bit restricted here and here, and we're going to, do these exercises as part of our routine that is going to help open up so that you can squat more comfortably or something like that. I know that's, once people have clarity like that, especially if you're in a client position, they're going to love that. They're going to absolutely love that. It's just that extra element of care.
Yeah, and it's not that hard to learn ranges of motion and how to do this stuff if you know what you're doing. And the benefit and the buy-in from the clients on the back end is tenfold. You will make your money back on learning this stuff in your first client, because it's so practical, so easy. And we make sure that in our mentorship that we make it easy, so it's something that everyone learns how to do. We also teach it virtually. So if you're an online trainer, which, we have a new online client starting with us next week, and her first rehab reset assessment comes up next week as well. And so, we know how to manipulate this and do this. I've been doing online coaching since like 2018. And doing virtual sessions where we're physically present at the same time. We're just in your ears and over Zoom or whatever. But I think that providing people with data and information, and our clients are getting more savvy. So if we're not getting savvy like at the same rate or arguably faster than our clients, they're going to supersede us, and they're going to find someone who gives them more knowledge, more education. So absolutely within our role as PTs to be assessing ranges of motion, and then being able to train and work with that. It's not like you're saying, I'm rehabilitating your injury, but if your hamstring range is restricting you and then your running is being impacted and you improve their hamstring range and their running gets better, then that's a win-win for everyone. But why don't we talk about, I guess, the things that are red flags, the things that probably aren't in the scope of practice of a PT, so that they can be really clear as to like, this is what I can do, but like, I really need some help here.
Yeah, for sure. We go through our 5 critical questions that we go over in our mentorship as well, and what we abide by, because you don't want to be stepping into the territory that you're not comfortable with, and that's where these range of motion and screening performances can help you identify if there is anything going on for you as a PT to refer on, and then essentially get more help for your client and get them the best results. So the first one that we go through is, if they do have an injury or a niggle or certain sensation in an area, we like to know their pain levels, and usually we just use a general. And in the health industry, or the medical health industry, we use what's called a visual analog scale, where it's a 0 to 10 scale. Now this is subjective, right? So like your 10 and my 10 might be different, and that's okay, because it's based on you and what you're feeling, and respecting that, not being like, hey, you feel a 10, but you got a little paper cut on your finger. You know what I mean? It's like, no, if that's really sore to you, you know what I mean? Like, you got to respect that. Everybody has different experiences, but essentially ours is a pain out of 10. And we don't want to be working much above, well, we don't want to be doing anything much above like a 3 out of 10, especially like as a personal trainer. If they're doing an exercise or something and it's more than a 3 out of 10, you definitely want to, you know, think about changing that to something that feels a bit better. And if you can't find anything that feels a little bit better, then obviously that's a bit of a red flag for you to want to refer on and get some extra professional help. What are your thoughts on that one, Zen?
Yeah, I think it also depends what they come in with, right? And articulating what type of pain as well. If it's DOMS and muscle soreness, it's like, you'll be right. But if it's a pain that is aggravated from an injury, I would also say we don't want them to be increasing pain in session. If you're a personal trainer, maybe playing in the +1 to 2 out of 10 if you're allied health professionals, but 7 out of 10 and above is like full-blown no-go. Like don't do anything more with that. That's really playing outside of the scope of our PTs. And you also don't want to be legally liable for that shit. Like, that's why you're a PT, because you hopefully love, you know, strength training, you love weight loss, you love building muscle mass, but you're probably not in the industry because you love rehab. Otherwise you'd be, you know, a rehab professional. So it really helps to, you know, do the shit that you love and create systems and whatnot around what you love, and allow the rehab professionals to take their side of things as well, so we can work together. So if they do have pain, our second critical question is what?
Are they experiencing any neural symptoms? So that leads into what you were just saying before. Now, neural symptoms, you know, we've got a variety of words and descriptive words we can use to describe what that might be for somebody. Because if you just say to, you know, somebody who doesn't know what neural is, and you say, hey, do you have any neural symptoms? They're going to be like, what? And that's not what we want. So that's where you can explain to them. First, you get them to explain to you what they feel, because you don't want to put words in their mouth. And that's something that we're big with, is that you say pink elephant, somebody's going to think about a pink elephant, right? You say to somebody, hey, is your, you know, shoulder tingling? You know, whether it's tingling or not, or whether you just put it in their, you know, head or in their vocabulary. So you let them talk always first. What do you feel? And then if it's anything along the lines of, you know, numbness, burning sensations, electric shocks, fiery sensations, tingles, all those sorts of, you know, descriptive words, then you've got a pretty good understanding that, hey, something neurally might be going on, and that's out of my scope. That's where you're going to refer on and get that advice from a health professional.
The one thing that I would add to that is like weird weakness. So not like I feel weak or I've been weak for 5 years, but like I lift my arm up overhead and immediately I like drop whatever's in my hand. Like it's really abnormal. That's the one thing that can also be a neural symptom if we're getting compression or you know, tension of a nerve or anything like that. So yeah, absolutely, neural symptoms are no-go zones. We don't want to fuck with those because they can be pretty tricky to manage and just not worth it. Like go and find some people you can work with, and you're always, as a PT, going to be loved if you can say, hey, go and see these guys, they're incredible, and they'll refer you back. Cool. Number 3, critical question.
Number 3 is any of your, or is that area like locking or giving away? This is more specific to kind of joints. But you know, you're standing on your knee or standing on your leg, let's say. You can't stand on your knee, you can kneel on your knee, and you feel it just go beneath you. You know what I mean? You're walking and you feel it kind of, you know, like jolt or collapse on you. That can be for the upper body as well. You know, you can have that in the shoulder too. Maybe you're doing a press up or a pressing movement, or you're just lifting something above your head and you feel like a jolty type movement. So that is going to be your next critical question.
Awesome. And so, you know, these are going to allude to things like any sort of instability in the knee. Maybe there's a meniscal tear. Obviously, you're not saying these things to your client, but, you know, you could call up your physio or whoever it is and be like, hey, there's some weird giving way sensations in the knee. I'm not sure if it's a meniscal tear or something going on with the ligaments in the knee, but can you assess it? You know, it's within your right to talk to them and say, hey, this is what I think. I can't actually diagnose. And I'm always very clear with that. As exercise physiologists, we can't diagnose either, but, you know, we'll say, hey, your knee's giving way. Oftentimes that can mean that, there is a little bit of instability in some of the structures in the knee, I'd really like you to go and get it assessed so that we can move forward with it. Awesome. Critical question number 4.
Number 4, this is, do they have pain on coughing or sneezing?
And why is this important?
This is important because this might have implications for some sort of low back disc injury, where you have that, quite abrupt force from, you cough and sneeze, you have such an intense contraction that you can't control. And if that's giving you a significant fair amount of pain or discomfort, then that's definitely a red flag in our eyes.
Yeah, awesome. And then the last one is?
The last one's night pain. So, are they waking up at night in immense pain? Are they struggling to get to sleep because of immense pain? Is it irregular? I think that's the key here, is that it's not, a small little kind of pain that, just was one night and it went away. Like, is it recurring? Are you getting it a couple of nights in a row? Is it preventing you from sleeping? Do you rate it quite high out of 10? So those sorts of things.
And I think just on that, that's not like I slept on my shoulder and now I have shoulder pain, because the big caveat here is that night pain that is, I guess, a little bit more systemic usually, and not as a result of sleeping on a certain side, can actually really, unfortunately, be like 1 in 100 can be linked to cancer. And it's really important that we're not going around being like, hey, you've got night pain, you probably have cancer, go see a GP, because you don't want to freak people out like that. And it's 1 in 100 cases that that's true. There's been one time that I recall where I said to a client, like, hey, I really need you to go see a GP. And they were like really pushing and being like, why? I don't need to. It's fine. It's been like this for years. And I'm like, no. And so in that circumstance, I actually, because the client was effectively like refusing, like, I've had, like, it's whatever. And I had to be like, look, this isn't such a rare thing, but as my duty of care, I have an awareness that night pain that's unresolved, that we don't know what's happening, can actually very, very rarely be linked to cancer. And so I do really need you to go and get this checked out. Like, I don't want you to be worried. And so that's worst case scenario. Hopefully you can not have to have that conversation with the client. But even though I had that conversation, at least I had done my due diligence and gone, I need you to go and see a GP, because I don't want you to, 5 years from now have something horrific happen because we didn't get this sorted. So do what you need to do in that scenario. Be very cautious about the communication around the night pain. But those 5 critical questions, do you want to just go through them again really quickly for people? Write it down if you guys aren't driving or walking.
So pain out of 10, are they experiencing neural symptoms? Are they experiencing any joints locking or giving way? Do they have pain on coughing or sneezing? And do they have some sort of irregular ongoing night pain?
Beautiful. Awesome. So we've gone through our critical questions. We've talked about them being our red flag questions if we're getting positive answers on any of those. We've talked about, you can assess joint by joint approach. You can assess specific movements and ranges of motion. Why don't we talk about what do we do with these results?
Yeah, so we compile these results and you effectively use them as your guidance to where you're going to start with your programming. So couple that with their goals, what they want to achieve, and then you can start to map out, okay, where do they want to finish? What is the end goal? Is it a marathon? Do they want to squat 100 kilos? Do they want to be able to just, go for a 5K run whenever they feel like it and feel fine, or whatever it may be? And then where they start, where you have to start with, okay, are we working on movement patterns first? Is the reason we're working on movement patterns because they might have restriction in certain areas, or is it just because their movement is off? And you only know that is if you zoom in a little further and see, okay, your hip range of motion's off, or your left side significantly less than your right side. That's a big one that we haven't touched on as well, is that left to right, right to left, opposite sides of the body. ideally they should be somewhat similar. If there is, a couple degrees off, fair. If there's, a fair way off, like visibly to the eye, then that that's something that's definitely worth working on. And then again, just to add on top of that, obviously prior history of injury and stuff like that can come into play. But that's all things that you'd probably have gone through with your client prior to maybe doing a movement screen. If not, that's where you can ask those questions. But yeah, essentially it gives you that starting point as to where you take your exercise prescription.
Absolutely. And I think, the thing that we're really big on too at Swift is that if someone's mobility is restricted, you can only strengthen them realistically within the range limitations that they already have. And so generally our first point of call is to make sure that we're using mobility to increase their range of motion if anything is restricted. Because if you imagine someone has, let's say 50% of their their shoulder external rotation range versus what they should have, and then you go and do, I don't know, like an Arnold press or something that like requires them to get into full external rotation, it's like you're not going to be able to get there. And so you can't strengthen in the range where then they lack mobility. And the fact that if you are forcing them there or you're requesting that they go there without having that pre-required range of motion, then you're exposing them to significantly greater injury risk. And it's really important that we just know where they're at so that we can grade the exposure so that we can get them there, but so that we're not limited by their mobility. And so the mobility would be the key thing. I kind of think of it as if, if you do have 50% of your mobility, then you can only get strong in that 50% of that range of motion. Whereas if we open up and we give you 80-90% of your mobility back, now you've got an extra 30-40% of strength to play with in new ranges. And so we can start to strengthen through there too, as opposed to if you're working on that, that threshold, that red line of the 50% of the mobility you have and you're trying to strengthen there, it's really playing such a risky game of strengthening at the end range of motion where you're most susceptible to injury, especially if you're restricted and your, joints and or muscular structure doesn't want you to go there. There's generally a reason for that. So I think, start with mobility. Then what's next?
After mobility, then we want to have a look at stability. That's a big one as well. So like we said before, looking at how stable they are. So we like to go towards, the Fitball Flamingo that we talked about in last episode of the podcast, seeing how they are on one leg and their hip stability. Sometimes a single leg balance can just be enough, even maybe eyes closed, to see how, is their ankle have a lot of movement? Do they have a lack of proprioception there? You can go to, more of an upper body one, where this is a little bit more of a health professional one, but the closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test, which is a mouthful. But essentially,
I'm impressed that you actually got that right. I usually fuck it up.
I probably fucked one of the words up, but it sounded good. But yeah, that's a good one as well. And that's a simple one. You just have your hands 91 centimeters apart, and in 15 seconds, you have to tap the opposite hand. And that's a good measure of it as well. And a nice one that you can easily do within 2 minutes with a client, especially if they're an upper limb athlete or something like that. And you so easy to compare data from testing 6 weeks ago to today. It's like, okay, you got 12 taps last week. We worked on your shoulder stability and now you've got 18 taps. Like, that's a significant difference, so
I think
that's
with
what we'd look
that
at.
test too, right? And 91 centimeters is actually a lot. Like, it's a pretty long distance. You're going to get some short people who you're going to need to adjust and create their own metric for, because they actually can't physically hold their body up at 91 centimeters of width with their hands out. But you will know almost immediately with people who have shoulder niggles or injuries, they can't even support their weight to let go of one hand to shift to one side. So it's a really great one for people who are starting back. They're really just getting into it. They're nervous about previous shoulder injuries and things like that. And then the faster they go, the more that they build confidence in that, you really see quite dramatic improvements. So that's really cool. And then with that as well, I'd also just like to add, not always do we mobility, then stability, then, your strength program or your conditioning or whatever you're doing. It can, as we've said before, be integrated as well, right? Like we're not just going, everything is isolated and all the mobility first, then all the stability second. But I think that mobility in the very first instance with new clients, especially when range of motion is restricted, should come before our key bulk of our training or our strength stuff, and can be integrated in, supersets, working sets, rest breaks, as with our stability, right? Like it's not going to dramatically impact your squat 10 rep set that you have to do a flamingo in between them. And I think some people sometimes take it a little too far and a little too literally, and they go, oh, well, it has to be a 2-minute solid rest break. And I'm like, yeah, if you're a power lifter. But if you're anybody else on the planet, like you can do a flamingo. And to be honest, if you don't have great hip stability and you're a power lifter, you've probably got bigger problems than what's your like 3RM or 1RM or whatever. So, figuring out what are the key things that are actually the lowest hanging fruit that we can start to program from our movement screening, from our assessment data, to get better results with clients.
Yeah. That's awesome. So good.
So what do you reckon our take home is for today?
Take home today, it's in the heading. If you're not assessing your clients right now, then you need to bloody start tomorrow. Not for any other reason, but it's going to increase your value as a coach. And it's also going to increase the level of care that you show to your clients. You're not just rocking up and taking them through a program that you've whipped up. You can actually, say, hey, we're doing this because of this. We're doing this to get you here, and we need to start with this, right? Like that you will be valued so much. And if you're in a gym where nobody else is doing it and you start doing it, heads are going to turn your way. Without a doubt.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Go Health Clubs, it was called back in the day, and I was doing, different exercises that none of the other PTs were doing, and they'd all been there for 10 plus years, and I was the spring chicken new kid on the block. But after a year or two, I could walk into the gym and any other PT could walk into the gym, they'd be like, oh, that's Zenia's client. Never seen me train with them before, but they just knew because they're like, oh, well, that's an exercise that Zenia would prescribe and no one else would fucking prescribe. Yeah. And it can be a little scary stepping outside the box and doing something that no one else is doing, but that's where the gold is. That's where, there's money to be made. That's where there's results to be created. And, if we're in the industry of helping people, let's find new, better, different ways to continue to upskill and help. So yeah, I absolutely agree. If you are not assessing, you are guessing, just like you would with, you don't just put a random program together every single week to try and get someone stronger, faster, fitter. You've got a process. So same thing with your testing.
And just to add to that, one last thing to add to that as well is that for the people that are listening, we're not telling you guys to do this so that you are the big dog in your gym. You know what I mean? We're telling you this so that you can bring more value to your clients, more value to yourself as your business, but also help others as well, right? Like help other PTs in your gym. They might be like, hey, what are you doing? What's that for? And that's your opportunity to teach. That's your opportunity to, something that you said to me, Zen, was you wanted to take a step in the coaching direction because you could help for every person you could help, they could help 20 or 30 more people, right? Instead of you just helping 10 clients, you could help 10 coaches who each have 30 clients. So that's you essentially helping 200 something people. And it's like, this is to help spread it and make everybody a little bit more, dedicated to helping their clients, because sometimes it's a matter of laziness and people not wanting to be better. But a lot of the time it's just because people don't know and people haven't been taught. Unfortunately, in some of these courses that you go through, you walk out and you know nothing, you know what I mean? And then you're learning. So definitely.
The learning starts when you hit the floor and when you actually 100%. Have clients and when we're ready to make things happen. So yeah, no, I love it. Make sure you're assessing. If you want to learn more about how to assess clients and go through the stuff with us, our educational mentorship next intake, we don't have specific dates yet, but I believe it's roughly being intaked, if that's a word, around May. So May 2023.
Yeah.
So if anyone's interested, we do have early bird specials and wait lists and things like that, so you can get your spot in early, because we cap these so that we can provide tons of value. And I reckon we'll leave it there until next time. Have a good one. See ya.
If you enjoyed this episode, it'd honestly mean the world to us if you could share it with a friend or on your socials, follow and leave a quick review so that we can bring you more real, raw and uncensored stories from industry leaders. We also love hearing your feedback, so please DM us on Instagram at Swift Coaches Academy if you have suggestions for future guests or topics. Until next time, and in whatever you do, move swiftly.